cabin always smelled like pine, wood smoke, and the faint echo of our earliest days together. I used to call it ours, but now I know better. It had taken 3 connecting flights and a long, jittery drive through snow-dusted mountain roads to get here. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not even my sister, who'd recently started asking more and more questions about Colin's space. All I had said was that I missed him, that I wanted to surprise him. I even baked his favorite walnut bread and tucked it into my carry-on, still warm in its parchment cocoon. The sun had already dipped below the tree line by the time I arrived, leaving the forest hushed and still, like it had taken a breath and held it just for me. My boots crunched across the snow as I approached the wraparound porch. The cabin windows glowed gold against the darkening sky, a cozy flicker behind frost-blurred glass. I was smiling, actually smiling, until I heard it. Laughter. Not Colin's low, worn chuckle, the one he reserved for clients and polite company, but a lighter one. Feminine. Familiar. I froze, hand halfway to the spare key hidden in the third plank under the porch rail. My heart thudded once, sharply, like it was trying to warn me. I crept closer, each step a betrayal against the quiet. The laughter came again, clearer this time, and then his voice, softer than I'd heard it in months. She won't even see it coming. Honestly, I think she'd thank me if she knew what freedom really looked like. A pause, the sound of ice clinking in glass, a gasp. "Colin, stop," the woman said playfully. "You're wicked. Wicked." That word lodged itself in my chest like a thorn. I edged closer to the frosted window and wiped a small circle with my sleeve. Inside, the fire roared like a secret trying to shout itself out. Colin sat on the worn leather couch, one hand resting, far too comfortably on the knee of a woman I didn't recognize, young, tan, with sleek hair and a sharp red manicure that caught the firelight. My bread sat forgotten in my bag, pressing into my ribs like dead weight. He leaned toward her, voice low but unmistakable. "I've already started shifting the money. Slowly, bit by bit. She trusts me too much to notice. By the time she figures it out, she'll be holding on to an empty house and a broken name." The woman giggled, draining her wine. "You're evil." "No," he said, brushing her cheek with the back of his fingers. "I'm just efficient, and done pretending." A roar started, in my ears, low and primal. My breath hitched in my throat. For a moment, I thought I might pass out right there in the snow, crumble like the icicles hanging from the porch eaves. I backed away from the window, one trembling step at a time, until the laughter turned back into muffled noise. The cold didn't bite, it seared. My eyes stung not from the wind, but from the sting of knowing. This wasn't just an affair. This was a plot, a strategy. A quiet war I didn't even know I was losing. I stumbled down the steps, leaving footprints that would disappear by morning. My fingers were too numb to fish my phone out of my coat pocket. Not that I would have known what to say. "Hi, it's me, your loyal, naive wife, just calling to say I heard you scheming to financially erase me while toasting to your freedom with a woman who wears better lipstick than I do." The forest swallowed me whole as I reached the car. I sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the trees. Colin had always said they were calming. Now they looked like silent witnesses, standing in judgment. I looked down at the wedding band on my finger. Simple, gold, slightly scuffed. It felt heavier than ever. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just drove, away from the cabin, away from him, away from everything I thought I understood. As I turned out onto the icy road, snow began to fall, erasing my tracks. It was like I had never been there at all. Looking back, I don't know if there was ever a moment I chose Colin, or if I simply slipped into his world like water finds the cracks in stone. We met at a gallery opening. I was showcasing a series of abstract pieces I'd painted on salvaged wood panels. He wandered over between wine sips, his suit sharp but slightly wrinkled, like he'd been in a rush to impress someone. I remember how he studied one of my paintings, the one I called Stillness After Fire, and said, "It feels like longing and ambition had a baby." I laughed then. I thought he saw me. Within a month, I was staying at his place more than my own. Within 6, I'd moved in. By the time we married, barefoot on a bluff in Mendocino, I'd all but stopped painting. His startup was launching, and he needed someone who could keep the chaos in check. He didn't ask. He just assumed I would. And I did. I took pride in making our house feel like a sanctuary. I learned to cook the way his mother used to, bought linen curtains that softened the afternoon light, rearranged my life like furniture, always accommodating him. The mortgage was steep. He said cash flow was tight in the early stages. So I picked up shifts at a local gallery on weekends and freelance design work. I told myself we were building something together, that the equity would be ours. But the deed, I later learned, was in his name alone. At the time, it didn't feel like a red flag, just logistics. He always made it sound reasonable. "You're the heart of this place," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me in the kitchen. "But someone has to steer the ship." I laughed and kissed his cheek, not realizing I'd been turned into a passenger. He didn't like my red scarf. Said it clashed with the neutral palette of our life. I stopped wearing it. He didn't care for the bold lipstick I used to wear in art school. Called it a bit much. He wasn't fond of my best friend Natalie, too opinionated, he said. I stopped replying to her texts, until eventually she stopped sending them. It happened slowly, quietly, like water rising in a room while you sleep. I told myself it was love, that relationships meant compromise, that I was lucky. Colin was handsome, successful, affectionate when he wanted to be. He called me darling in public, held my waist possessively, told people I was his anchor. I clung to that word, anchor, until I realized anchors don't keep you safe. They just keep you from moving. The wedding ring felt heavier each year. Not because it changed, but because I did. I began to notice the subtle corrections in his tone when I spoke too freely at dinner parties. How he interrupted me when I spoke about art, but leaned in when the conversation turned to his tech company. How, when I voiced concerns, he'd tilt his head and murmur, "You're just overwhelmed. You need rest." Once I brought up therapy. He laughed like I'd told a joke. We don't need strangers telling us how to live our lives. And I agreed. I always agreed. Because the alternative was conflict, and I'd learned that in our home, conflict meant cold shoulders, subtle punishment, withheld affection. I kept a box of old sketches in the attic. Every now and then, when he was away on business, I'd pull them out and run my fingers over the edges. They smelled faintly of linseed oil and possibility. I never showed them to him. I told myself they weren't good enough. But the truth is, they were mine. Untouched. Unjudged. Uncorrected. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in the middle of our walk-in closet, just staring at the rows of clothes I no longer recognized. Earth tones, soft knits, the bright yellows, and electric blues I once loved had vanished, folded into donation bags, forgotten. I looked like someone he'd designed. One night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Hair tied back, expression blank. I looked muted, faded, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. I whispered, "Where did I go?" And the silence that answered was louder than anything. Still, I stayed, because he told me we were close to the big moment, that the company would go public, that we'd finally be able to relax, that we were doing this together. Together. It's strange how a single word can unravel when you look at it long enough. Like a painting you once adored, until you suddenly notice the cracks. I returned to the city with a performance rehearsed in. Once I kissed Colin hello at the door, let him spin a tale about rough terrain and getting real perspective. I nodded, smiled, tucked away the scent of her perfume I recognized from the cabin, citrusy and expensive, and placed the walnut bread on the counter like it still meant something. He didn't even notice it was homemade. For the next few days, I moved like fog through our house, drifting from room to room, studying the spaces like I was seeing them for the first time. The neatly labeled files in his home office, the bank statements tucked into drawers, the hollow ring of my name in his mouth. He had taught me not to ask questions, but now, every question sat under my tongue like a blade. I waited until he left for a late dinner with investors to open his laptop. He always said he preferred paper trails to digital ones, but old habits die hard. His passwords were still based on old album names and numbers that once mattered. Inside his inbox were emails with subject lines like asset shift plan, timeline confirmation, and one that hit like a slap: divorce prep, Arizona filing, Arizona, a state I'd never lived in. One where marital laws made it easier to claim sole assets if one spouse could be shown to have abandoned the marital home. The irony made my stomach turn. Attached was a draft, cold, clinical, filed 2 weeks prior. Due to prolonged emotional absence and detachment, Colin Whitaker respectfully requests a dissolution of marriage. I read it once, twice. My hands trembled, but not from shock. By now, that had calcified into something else. Something heavier, something ancient. In our bedroom closet, I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, surrounded by rows of beige sweaters and pressed trousers I had picked out for him. I stared at my dresses, long, soft, muted, chosen more for his preference than mine. My red scarf was gone. I think he donated it years ago. The ring on my finger glinted under the soft closet light. It had become a shackle disguised in sentiment. I wept like I hadn't in years. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs that left me breathless. I cried for the version of me who once believed in us. For the girl who smiled in engagement photos and painted her nails nude because he liked them simple. For the woman who thought loyalty would be repaid. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was obliteration. I had nothing. No house, no savings, no family property untouched. He had taken a loan against my grandmother's cottage, forging my signature, slipping the paperwork past me during a busy week. I remembered him handing me a stack of documents and saying, "Just standard stuff. I'll explain it later." Later never came. My name had vanished from joint accounts. Even the art I'd made in the early days, framed and hanging in the hallway, was labeled as gifted by local artist in his company brochures. Every thread of my life had been slowly pulled away until only the shell remained. I was no one on paper, not his partner, not his co-founder, not even his wife, legally, not if he had his way. And yet, as I rocked on the closet floor, clutching a sweater I hated, something broke open. Not in the way glass shatters. Loud, final, but like ice cracking over a lake, echoing deep and long. I wasn't gone. I was buried. And if I had been erased quietly, I would return just as silently, unseen, but deliberate. I pulled out the small cedar box I'd kept under the bed. Inside were fragments, old art show postcards, receipts, journal entries, even a copy of the deed to my grandmother's cottage from before the loan. I had forgotten about most of it. But in my grief, I had documented more than I realized. Scribbled notes, dates, password hints, names. I stayed up all night cataloging everything, piecing together a picture even I had refused to see until now. Colin wasn't just cruel, he was calculating, and I had been convenient. But he had made one miscalculation. He thought I would break quietly. He had forgotten. I was the one who built this house, brick by brick, smile by smile, sacrifice by sacrifice. He might have drawn up plans to erase me. But I was not so easily deleted. I didn't pack much. One suitcase, a weathered sketchbook, my old paintbrush roll tied with frayed ribbon, a backup drive I'd hidden in a pair of wool socks, a scarf, not red, but close, burgundy. It was the only thing I brought that made me feel visible. Before I left, I sent Colin a text. Taking a digital break. At the retreat center until the 10th. Don't worry. I watched the message deliver, and then powered off my phone, tossing it into the glove box of a rental car I parked near the airport. From there, I took a train north to a town so small it didn't show up on most weather apps. It was the place where I had taken a summer art class years ago. Before him, before us, before I traded my canvases for spreadsheets and smiles that didn't belong to me. A bakery near the harbor had a dusty room for rent sign in its window. I stepped inside with air still thick with cinnamon and warmth. The woman behind the counter looked up, narrowed her eyes kindly, and said, "You look like you've lost something important." I nodded. She didn't ask what. Her name was Clara. She was 73, widowed, with hands always dusted in flour, and eyes that missed nothing. In exchange for early morning help, dough rolling, dishwashing, deliveries, she gave me a tiny room above, the bakery and a key that jingled like a charm bracelet. There was no mirror in the room. I didn't ask for one. The first night, I laid on the small bed and stared at the ceiling beams. They were uneven, cracked in places, but they held, like I hoped I still could. The days became ritual: knead, bake, serve, clean. Then, after closing, I walked to the harbor with my sketchbook and watched the water sway like breath. I sketched badly at first. My hands were stiff, my lines uncertain, but each day they remembered more. One night, I painted a field of lilies. Not red, not yet, but white, fragile, blooming. I began reading again, books on financial fraud, survivor memoirs, psychology. I listened to podcasts about women who lost everything and came back sharper, stronger, stories like mine, only not mine. Not yet. 3 weeks in, I stopped crying in my sleep. Clara noticed. "You're quieter now," she said over tea. "Not emptier, just becoming. I didn't know what I was becoming, only that I wasn't her anymore, the woman who blinked away pain and called it grace. The woman who smiled through betrayal because it was easier than fighting the silence. I started keeping a journal, just for myself. Each entry began with the same line: "I am still here." It became a ritual, proof, a contract between the woman I had been and the one I was shaping from the wreckage. I didn't look at photos. I didn't reach for memories. But sometimes, I'd catch the scent of something. Baking cinnamon, ocean, salt, turpentine from a newly opened tube of oil paint, and it would tug at a corner of the past. I let it tug, but I didn't follow. Clara gave me a set of blank recipe cards one evening. "In case you want to keep track of your favorites," she said. I didn't write recipes. Instead, I wrote truths on each one. He lied about the mortgage. He filed for divorce behind my back. He touched her knee while I stood in the snow. I kept them in a box beneath my bed. Not to wallow, but to remember. To hold the facts in my hand like stones, grounding me when my grief tried to rewrite the story. Clara never pried. She only once said, "You remind me of myself," after Harold, after the storm. "What storm?" I asked. She smiled. "The kind you survive, and then become." Each day I stood a little taller, breathed a little deeper. I painted a canvas in crimson and indigo and titled it Inheritance. I didn't know what it meant yet, only that it felt honest. One morning, as I kneaded dough beside her, Clara asked, "What will you do when it's time?" I didn't answer right away, but in my pocket, I clutched a folded list I'd been adding to silently for weeks. Names of lawyers, emails, copies of the forged documents, bank trails. I was healing. Yes, but I was also preparing. It started with a haircut. Not a dramatic buzz or platinum dye job, but something quieter, intentional. I sat in a chair that overlooked the sea, and when the stylist asked what I wanted, I said, "Something that doesn't ask for permission." She smiled. "Sharp, then?" "Yes," I replied. "Sharp enough to remember myself." I left the salon and walked home barefoot, shoes in hand, feeling the salt-laced wind run through my cropped hair like an exhale I'd been holding in for years. That same week, I opened my own bank account under my maiden name. Clara had a friend at the credit union, an older man with kind eyes and no questions. When he handed me the new card, I stared at the embossed name for a long time. Ava Langley. Not Ava Whitaker. Not Mrs. Colin anything. Ava Langley. The girl who painted with her fingers and wore cherry red in winter. I started painting under a pseudonym, Ash Langley. Ash, because fire always leaves something behind. Ash, because it sounded like the second act of someone no longer afraid to burn things down. I uploaded my work anonymously to a digital collective. Within 3 weeks, one of my pieces, Inheritance, the crimson and indigo canvas, sold for $600. It was enough to rent a studio above the florist's shop. Small, dusty, full of light. Mine. While the bakery smelled like cinnamon, the studio smelled like turpentine and something sacred. I worked late into the night, sometimes waking up with paint on my wrists, on my throat, like war paint I didn't remember applying. But beneath the paint and progress, I was building something else. A case. Every email I'd forwarded to my backup drive. Every bank statement I'd printed and highlighted. The forged signature on the loan against my grandmother's cottage. Screenshots. Voice memos. Even the cabins. Security camera footage. Colin had bragged once that it auto-backed up to the cloud. I found the login on a sticky note he once left in a drawer. I watched the footage only once. Watched him pour her wine. Lean in. Speak softly about transitioning assets. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just cataloged it, labeled the folder. For the reckoning. Then I found her, the lawyer. Her name was Celeste Harlow. Not flashy, not cheap. She specialized in high-conflict marital dissolution with financial entanglements. Her office didn't have sleek art or soft jazz. Just rows of case binders and a steel kettle she kept on a warmer. She listened as I spoke, nodding, taking notes with a fountain pen. When I finished, she said only 3 words. Textbook coercive control. She laid out a plan, calm and exact. We would file first, locally, not in Arizona. We would challenge his filing, argue jurisdiction. We would present evidence of asset manipulation, forgery, and emotional abuse. We would do it all legally, carefully, quietly. You'll walk in not as a victim, she said, but as a witness, to your own survival. I left her office lighter. Outside, the city buzzed. I sat at a bus stop across from a boutique. In the window hung a red silk blouse. Bold, off-shoulder, unapologetic. I walked in and bought it without trying it on. That night, I burned the last bottle of perfume Colin ever bought me. The scent had been his favorite, vanilla and vetiver, I used to wear it like armor. Now, I lit the bottle in a steel bowl and watched the flames curl upward, bright and brief. The smoke smelled like endings. Later, standing in the mirror, I pulled on the red blouse and stared at myself. The woman staring back wasn't bitter or broken. She was alert, focused, beautiful, in a way Colin never deserved to witness. She looked like someone becoming. I started writing letters to myself, notes I'd slide under the bakery door late at night like confessions. Dear Ava, you were not crazy. You were carefully confused. Dear Ava, the silence wasn't peace. It was power imbalance dressed as calm. Dear Ava, you are not what he left behind. You are what rose after. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. Beside them, the journal still sat, each page starting with the same defiant, simple line. I am still here. But now, I added something new after it. And I am ready. The day I walked into his attorney's office, the sky was clear and cold. No storm, no snow, just that sharp winter light that shows everything in brutal honesty. Fitting, I thought. Truth deserves daylight. I wore a tailored gray coat with a structured collar and my red silk blouse underneath. Not for him. For me. The color didn't scream. It declared. The receptionist offered coffee. I declined. My hands didn't shake. Colin was already inside when I entered the conference room. His lawyer sat to his right. Young, smug, flipping through a file without really looking. Colin looked up and paled. There's a kind of silence that happens when a man realizes he has underestimated you. It's not fear, not yet. It's confusion, then calculation. Then the slow, simmering panic of realizing the narrative is no longer his to control. Good morning, I said, placing my folder on the table like an offering and a warning. Celeste, my lawyer, opened it. Inside, timelines, bank transfers, notarized statements, a copy of the Arizona divorce filing, the forged loan documents, and an affidavit from a handwriting expert. At the bottom, a cease and desist letter with conditions he wasn't prepared for. His lawyer's face fell first. Then Colin's. You filed first? He asked, voice tight, almost dazed. Celeste didn't blink. We did. In state. Jurisdiction. Holds. You'll find the financial manipulation allegations compelling. Colin leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. This isn't what you want, Ava. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. You don't know what I want. He tried to smile. The old charm, rusted and thin. I never wanted to hurt you. Things just got complicated. I stayed quiet. He tried again, leaning forward. I'm offering a clean split. We can avoid dragging this out. Be adults. Celeste slid the document across the table. That offer no longer applies. We're pursuing restitution, property recovery, and legal damages. His jaw clenched. You think you can win? I looked him in the eyes, calm as sea glass. I already did. In the days that followed, it unraveled fast. His girlfriend, Cameron, showed up at the house trying to collect her things. I was there with a locksmith and 2 sheriff's deputies. She stormed up the walk in heeled boots and red lipstick. He promised me this house, she snapped. I handed her a copy of the deed. My name. Dated before the wedding. A clause in the prenuptial I'd quietly insisted on all those years ago, the only time I pushed back. Her lips parted in stunned silence. He also promised me fidelity, I said softly. How did that work out for either of us? She left without another word. I changed the locks. I walked through the house alone, room by room, running my fingers along old furniture like ghosts. I opened the cedar box of recipe cards and burned, The ones labeled forgiveness and false peace. I kept the ones labeled truth and freedom. They smelled like closure. Mediation was where Colin made his final performance. He began with charm, compliments, soft apologies, half-lies wrapped in nostalgia. Then came the threats. If I pushed for damages, he'd go public. If I didn't, sign quickly, he'd make court hell. Then came the tears, the breakdown, I just wanted a chance to be happy. I let Celeste handle it all. I watched his theatrics with the same detachment I used to feel in our hallway mirror. Only this time I recognized the man performing. He wasn't a monster. He was small, weak, built on illusions and bravado. The final papers were signed with no eye contact. He muttered something on his way out. Maybe a curse, maybe a goodbye. I didn't hear. I didn't care. Outside, the city hummed. Not loud, just alive. I walked alone to the nearest art supply store and bought a fresh canvas. That night, in my studio, I painted slowly, carefully. A single red lily bloomed across the canvas. Strong stem, open petals, the center dark and bright at once. Called it reclamation. Sometimes I still wake up early, just before dawn, and sit on the bakery rooftop with my tea. The air tastes clean. The fog rolls in like breath. I'm not the same woman who stood outside that cabin in the snow. Not the girl who thought silence meant love. Not the wife who traded her voice for comfort. I'm something else now. I'm not healed completely. Healing is not a finish line. It's a language I'm still learning. But I am free. Not because he let me go, but because I took myself back.